Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman podcast.
Social wealth is really the value of your direct, meaning the people that you know, and their network, which is their indirect network in your life, right? And value is both in quantitative things and things that they can actually physically give you, and then the other part of it is introductions and people inside of their network that they can introduce you to.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman podcast, as always and forever, most likely, and welcome to today's show. Today's show, we have Jason Treu, and we're discussing what social wealth is, how we can build it, and how we can leverage it to close more deals easier. That's the key thing. It makes selling easier. You can find out more about Jason over at jasontreu.com. And with that all said, let's jump into today's show. Hey, Jason, and welcome back to the Salesman podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show again. It's exciting to be back and speaking with you.
You're more than welcome, sir. We're going to talk about social wealth, social capital, and we touched on something pre-recording that we're going to dive into as well on the front of building deeper relationships with people that I'm super interested personally to dive into. So we'll touch on that as well, perhaps towards the end of the show. But I want to start with a super basic leading question here that's going to take us down this funnel of social wealth. And I'm going to start by asking you, do you have a definition of what social wealth actually is?
Well, social wealth is really the value of your direct, meaning the people that you know, and their network, which is their indirect network in your life, right? And value is both in quantitative things and things that they can actually physically give you, and then the other part of it is introductions and people inside of their network that they can introduce you to. And I think when you combine that together, you can create a life that you love. And I think that's really important, because then you're pretty much limitless if you think about that, because most people have anywhere between 5 to 20 people that they have really good relationships with. That mean if they referred you in, that person would take your phone call or would meet with you, right? Most people's networks are bigger than that, but the really strong connections that someone can actually do for you. So if you think about that, you have a pretty vast network of people that can help you. Most people, what they don't do is actually tap into it by asking for help and seeking it out, right? That's the real hard part about it from other people. And, a lot of men don't do this because they feel that it's weakness, right? They're being, vulnerable, and they're sharing that they don't have the answers for that. And a lot of men don't like doing that. So that really creates a lot of challenges.
So I am a sufferer of inability to ask for help. And we've covered it on the show a bunch of times. And I've still not found a solution for it other than I'm conscious of it, and so I overcompensate and force myself to ask for help. But is there, just on this, while we touched on it, is there a solution to that? Is there a way to go about it other than, as I said, my kind of band-aid solution that doesn't solve the problem, but kind of gives me the correct results, is to just overcompensate and consciously make sure that I'm asking for help when I can?
Yeah, I think that's really it. I think the other part of it is that if you start learning to give without attachment or give without wanting anything in return and helping people, it's easier to justify giving because you know that you're helping other people, and eventually this stuff all comes back. And if you do more of it, then asking for help really is not putting someone out, even someone who you may not have helped already, because they're going to know what you're all about, right? I mean, I think that's a huge piece of it. And, that really separates people in the world today. Because when you go to high level, I have clients go to very high level conferences like the main TED conference. And when they walk in and they're willing to give to people without wanting anything in return, it changes the whole dynamics of a relationship, because those people then know that they're not trying to take something from them. And people who are really well off or high level executives, the first thing that in their mind is, what do you want from me? And when you can lower that barrier, they're willing to give you anything, because they don't meet many people that immediately do that, except people that are in their inner circle psychologically, meaning best friends, business partners, close people in their life.
So clearly, sales professionals, and probably 2/3, if not more, of the people listening to this right now, the tens of thousands of people that are going to download this show over the next few days, and I hate it because I cover it all the time, but a lot of people do not have this mindset of give first, and just not expect anything back and keep giving, and eventually it works out. For me, this was a realization that I made about a year ago when I doubled down on the podcast, and it's come to light more recently with the launch of the sales school I've done no, and we can talk about this off air as well perhaps, but I've done no promotion of the sales school, and it launched last night. And already we've done about 20K in revenue from it, from no promotion, just from giving value up front with the podcast. A lot of people, again, will be listening to this going, oh, well, you run a business, you're not in sales, it doesn't translate. But it does, and I'm really passionate about it. Yeah, of course. I'm really passionate about this. So why, first off, I guess, to become conscious of it, why are we wired to not want to give if there's not an opportunity to get something back as a sales professional? I
think a lot of people are worried you're going to get taken advantage of, right? And I think that's the problem. People are so worried that people are going to take something from them that you operate in three modes. Either people give, match, or take, right? And most people are matchers and takers, right? And it's something that you need to be very aware of. And I think people who give, right, the other problem is that you'll see people in your life that'll give and they won't have boundaries. And that's the key. You don't give just and give, you have boundaries on it. You give a little bit, and if people do not reciprocate, then you have to say no and then move on in your life, right? But I think it's important to do that, right? Because otherwise, if you're just giving unconditionally, then you really can get taken advantage of, and you'll stop giving to people. And I think the part of it that really goes into this a lot is that there's a law of reciprocity, is that if you give to someone, right, people will give back to that, right? The 7 laws of persuasion, or that Robert, I forgot his last name now. I'm just drawing a blank on it.
Cialdini, but everyone says it differently.
Yeah, exactly. He came out and he talked about that, and he's got an actually new updated book now on that called Persuasion, and it's really good. And he talks about that in the book on the law of reciprocity. So you give to someone feels bad, and they're going to give back to you many times, right? Not always, but in many times that they will.
So let's just touch on this for a second then, because what I was going to ask you, and you've answered the question, and you're on my wavelength for this, because some people believe in like the secret and the law of attraction, and that if you give, you get, positive vibes go out into the world and it comes back to you. My background is in chemistry and chemical physics and computational chemistry, and I know that there's no evidence of this. People can believe what they want as long as what works for them. But what you're saying makes total sense to my logical brain of, if you give to people, this weird thing happens, rightly or wrongly, they become slightly, even if they're not conscious of it, they become slightly indebted to you. And then they want to get rid of that debt to you by giving you back something. So it just it can just happen naturally, can't it? There doesn't need to be any laws of karma or weird things going on beyond that.
No. And I think the other part of it is that if you live in a world in which people are constantly trying to take from you, and now you're the person who steps outside that and gives first, you stand out amongst everyone else. And then people like that want you to be around because they're not worried you're going to come in their world and steal something or take things. And so they're more apt then to help you and actually to forward help to you because you stand out and you allow them to feel safe, right? That's the key thing. It's people want to feel safe. And even men do in that world because they have so many things that they're doing. They can't worry about someone coming in and taking advantage and ruining what they have, right? So they're not going to allow you to do that if you approach it on the other way. And plus, everyone approaches them like that, and it's easy to say no or just to procrastinate getting back to that person if that's how you approach them. Because you stand out. There's no reason for them to take action. There's no urgency for them to get back and help you.
Definitely. And from this then, clearly we're going to talk about social capital, social wealth here. Is giving first the best bang for buck way to build a network and to build social capital within that network? Is that the best way to go about it?
It is. And there's a great book called Giftology by John Ruhlin, and he goes on how to actually give gifts. Like he's actually the number one professional or corporate gift giver. And you don't really need to spend a lot of money on it. But the people that you want to reach, that's how you get through them if you personalize gifts. Most people just don't do that. And he goes through his book, and it's a great book for people to read, especially in sales, how to break through to higher levels, or if you have a higher level connection, how to keep that connection. One of my clients, he was a CEO of a large company. he was mentioning Bill Belichick and someone he really liked. So what I did was I looked and I found, and it took me a while. I just actually gave it to him, I think 2 weeks ago, a Patriots helmet with an actual Patriots helmet that was worn out on the field, signed by Bill Belichick, and it's almost impossible to find. And he loved it, right? And I told him that, he's been going through a lot and leading this company, and I wanted just to celebrate success, not because there was an end destination, because the journey really is what matters. And I could tell that really meant a lot. He's got it proudly on his desk. He could have anything on his desk, right? And it's the CEO of a billion-dollar company, so it's not like some small person. And that's what you have to do, right? And I've done it with another of my clients. He's a big Baltimore Orioles baseball fan here in the U.S., and so I got him a ball signed by Cal Ripken, and then basically the same thing happened. And I just tested this out to say, is this stuff really going to work? And it does, because you celebrate people, and it doesn't have to be the size of the gift. It could be just a thank you note to someone that you handwrite out. It's just giving something to other people first and leading with it and thinking about them and personalizing it makes all the difference in the world, because most people just don't. Almost no one does these things. So if you're a salesperson out there and you want to stand out, that's what you do, right? You sign a new client, you actually write them a hand thank you note and send it out, because you'll know what? That person probably hasn't gotten that from any other person, no matter how much money that they have given to another vendor out there.
I'm going to totally ruin the surprise now, but everyone that comes on the show, I send them a little handwritten note. I'm not got any of the cards to hand now to show everyone on YouTube, but and it takes 5 seconds to be like, hey Jason, appreciate your time, appreciate your insights, something like that, and then I sign it. And I get more emails back from the guests that come on the show saying thank you for that than if I sent them a whole load of business, if I really promoted really hard a webinar that they're doing or whatever it is. I get way more replies and way more enthusiastic replies from these seemingly simple, silly little notes that I send out than anything else. And for me, it's here in the UK, we've got the Royal Mail, and it's like you can get an international stamp essentially. So I've just got I think they're £1.10 or whatever it is. I've just got a big sheet of these. I write the note out, put the stamp on, put the address on, and post it.
But you know why that works? Because think about it. Think about the last handwritten card that you got. For the most part, people who write us handwritten cards are the people that we love the most and who love us the most in our life, right? There are exceptions, but they're not that many. And so that's why it makes it special, because your mind goes back to seeing those cards that have been written from people and handwritten notes that have gone over your entire lifetime when that card's in there, right? And that's why these things work really well. You put people back in that place, and so they have a very warm feeling towards a person who did that. And it almost always works for people. And it's simple, but that's the thing. You anchor people in those moments.
And I think it goes deeper than that as well. Let me ask you, Jason. So you've been on a bunch of podcasts. You're launching your own show as well. Out of the shows you've been on, has anyone ever done anything like that for you in the past?
I've been on. It's happened to me 3 times out of being on, I think, 175 podcasts. So we're talking, almost like less than 2%, right? And so that's extremely low. So I can recite to you the people that sent it to me too.
There we go.
Right?
And it just sets you apart. And so for the salesperson listening to this now, let's make it practical for the B2B sales professional. Perhaps they don't have the budget, or they want to experiment with it and they don't want to be buying football helmets. Or American football helmets. We don't have helmets in proper
right?
football. Books, yes. I love this.
Buy a book,
yes.
And then write. One of the things that's coming up now, and yeah, it's a U.S. thing, but any country someone can think about how to do this, is that in the U.S. you have Christmas coming up. Well, everyone gets Christmas cards, but no one gets Thanksgiving cards, right? So I send out Thanksgiving cards to people because it's the best thing, or I'll hand them to them, and which is even better. And that's a fantastic way to step out from someone else. You give people when they're not expecting it. Give them a book that you really like, and then tell them why you're giving it to them. And that's all you need to do, right? And it can be a $10 book. And if you know they're reading on a Kindle, you can actually send it via Kindle, which is even several dollars cheaper if you're ordering it that way. So those are great really inexpensive gifts for people. So there's a wide range of gifts that you can get to someone else. It doesn't have to be, or if you're going to get someone a gift, get it engraved, get their initials on it, get something that's actually really personalized, because then they know you really went out of the way to do it and think about it. And so that little bit more money that you spend makes that gift so much more significant to that person and really stands out. And it can open doors too, right? I mean, if you want to get into a client and you want to try something and you want to stand out, you give someone a personalized gift like that, like they're going to feel guilty if they don't get back to you, right? It's going to work a lot of the time. Not all the time, but it's going to work a lot of the times. And really, you don't have to be right many times if you're selling things to get a deal closed, to make back all of the money that you would have had on it and make it significantly easier. And that person will always remember it.
For sure. And you mentioned something before we started recording, and that is getting to deeper relationships through deeper questions with people. So I'm perhaps not sold that you should sell, in the B2B world I'm from anyway, I'm not sure that you should send even for example, I work in medical device sales. So if I sent a surgeon a book that I'd never met before, they would probably be thinking, who is this dude who's sending me stuff that's trying to get into my theatre? But after I'd spent a bit of time with them, built rapport, and then had deep conversations with them over a couple of pints, which happened all the time in the medical device world, I could give them a book then and it would have massive value. So let's focus on this perhaps idea of get into those deeper conversations, because this is something, as I said to you, Jason, before I click record, it's something I'm naturally good at. I don't know why I'm good at it. I don't even know the process really that goes into place. So I'm keen to get your take on this, because I'm going to learn something from it as well. How do we go from chit chat to those conversations that actually mean something?
Well, I think part of it is if you're talking about a person that's outside the organization that you're trying to meet, one of the things you have to understand is that in business, a lot of times we try to make this work-life separation, and it's not about that. It's work-life integration, right? And how you get to know people ultimately is getting to know their personal challenges. And either you can empathize through that, find common ground, or you can relate to that. And when two people can start doing that, then you really go down the road of building a deep relationship, right? And you need to think about relationship building like you would build it with your best friend or like a partner in your life when you're doing business. In that way, it can help frame it, because most people feel constrained and like, well, I can't ask that question, I can't do that. But it's actually the opposite. So what you need to do in situations like that is ask people questions initially, and this is what I do, is asking a question, so what's exciting that's going on in your life right now? It's great small talk. It makes it really safe, and that person then could share literally anything that's going on. So you might learn something important, or you could say, so what are you passionate about in your life? What are you passionate about in your life outside of work? Well, those are great conduits, because they can start warming someone up to ask them deeper questions over time, right? And then you can share personal experiences as well. And that's how you do things, because what happens is that when people lead with vulnerability, they lead with authenticity, you make it safe for someone else to share, so the relationship can go way quicker, right? So I had a client who went to Italy and he was from New Zealand, and I told him when he went out to talk to people about he got wine, and we get white wine, and people would say, oh, what wine did you get? And I'm like, oh, I got some Italian white wine, but it's not as good as my New Zealand, right? And then he'd say, I'm from New Zealand. And they'd say, oh, really? And then he'd say why he went to Italy, and he would bring up so we could actually be really vulnerable and have great conversations, because within 4 or 5 exchanges, he'd actually get on the meat and he'd actually share who he was and why he was there and trying to, learn another language and build a life and do things. And that would really escalate that relationship a lot quicker with someone else. And that's the key thing, because you have to be able to start doing that. So when someone tells you what they're passionate about, then you can riff off of that if there's some deep meaning, or you could also share what you're passionate about or ask them deeper questions that allows them to dig into that situation and just be there. And don't worry about getting to the sale. Just keep staying there and asking them the questions, because that person will take time for you because they like you. So it doesn't matter. The money will come. The relationship will not. And so that's what you have to end up doing. And it's the same thing in a company too, right? With the people that you're working on or managers, You've got to spend the time doing these things because that's the key that separates you from everyone else and what will separate your success.
So is what you're saying, Jason, that when we go to see a new potential customer, we shouldn't be stood up, arms by our sides with a PowerPoint presentation like this, just clicking through, and then at the end of it, just ask some weird business-based questions and then leave as quick as possible? Is that the wrong thing to go at here, Jason?
Completely. Right, because that's not what people want, because business is a social thing, right? The undertones of it all, we're social beings, right? We're social thinkers. That's why our brains are bigger than other animals. So you've got to feed into the base instincts, right? And people are people, whether they go to work or whether they're home. And you've got to tap into that social aspect of it, and then the doors will open for you. So you have to take the time in order to do that. And you've got to make it a priority, because then your life will get so much easier. Because think about it, everyone listening to this, the people that you work with, that you have the best relationships with, is it not easier to collaborate with them? Is it not easier to communicate? Is it not easier to conflict resolution with them? If you do get an argument with them, people will then de-escalate it and just move on, and they won't bring it up again. But people that you don't know as well, that doesn't happen. So if you think about that paradigm, okay, well, that's extended to clients as well, right? And the same thing happens. You have a lot more leeway with a client who really likes you as a person than you do with a client who does not. So the key is get in that space with people, and you open yourself up to a lot more opportunities, and you don't have to be near as perfect. You don't have to be near as good as soft skills and other things that other people do if you focus on the relationship first and the outcome second.
So
it happens, with everyone.
Yeah, so we're giving value up front. We are buying gifts to perhaps sway a little bit of favor and debt people into us and influence people a little bit slightly on a positive level. We're not taking advantage of everyone, but we're leveraging the tools that are available to us. We're having deeper conversations rather than these weird corporate slideshow presentations. And I think that's more of like an Eastern philosophy, perhaps, of talking about life and family and business in general, and then doing business in the last 5 minutes of the meeting. So perhaps we're rescheduling or reframing our sales meetings like that as well. I touched on at the beginning of the show, I've got a very analytical brain, so that all works for me. It makes total logical sense. But how can we measure the progress that we're making, or can't we? Because for me, clearly that takes a lot of work up front. For me to commit to putting all that work up front, I need to know that there's going to be some kind of return at some point, or some measurable, I've now got 10 people in my network. I've now got 20 people in my network. Is there a way to measure this to reduce the friction of just having to believe that it's going to work out for us?
Well, you can also test it out and do it on half the people and not half the people, half the people you're working with, right? And not on the others. You can also look at your past performance, right? And you can see, how does this compare year over year if I do this for the next year compared to the last year, right? And that stuff will be very valuable to see, right? Because you've got to give this stuff long enough time. It's not like magic pills that just work, right?
And on that, because this is important, because it's very easy to listen to a podcast and flippantly be like, yeah, I'll do that. And then if you don't put a plan in place, it never happens, because obviously there's so much content being thrown at people, and we throw so much content at people. But if people wanted to put, the listeners now, B2B sales professionals, they're driving to the next meeting, they're going to implement all this with the next prospect that's going to sit opposite to on the table. Clearly, they're going to have good results. It'd be very difficult to have a negative result if you're doing all this and you're not doing it from a place of trying to take or manipulate. So people are doing it from a good place. They're physically going to do it in the next few days. How long should we be waiting to see if we're testing all of this, whether it's working or not? Is this days? Is it months? Is it years? Just to give people, a time frame for some of this, perhaps.
I think 3 to 6 months is probably a good shot to see what's happening realistically, right? Because if you think about it and all the studies out there, and you look at what people talk about in leadership and management, it's soft skills, it's trust, right? It's relationships. It's not performance. It's not IQ. That's not at the top of how people look at things, right? If you look at even Tony Robbins and a lot of other studies, it's 80% psychology, 20% skills. And you can argue either way a little bit, but it is mainly psychology. So your selling is a psychological sell. It's not a physical skill set selling, right? because you don't have to be the best salesperson if you psychologically get into someone's mind. And even if you are, if you don't do that, it will not work. People don't want to buy from robots. So if you're the best robot out there, so if you have the best skills possible, you will not be successful, because psychology plays such a role, because we're human beings. And again, we buy from people that we like, and everything in the world today, we're buying it because it's, it's maybe not the best, but we have some emotional attachment to it, right? That's what Steve Jobs did, right? I mean, Bill Gates did that with his company. I mean, these people do this stuff all over the place. Virgin did it, right? Richard Branson with his airline, right? That's what people were paying more money, because of the experience of flying Virgin. That's how we separate it out from other airline. And if you've ever, been in Virgin, you know that that's the case, right? In the U.S., like, by far the best airline. I mean, not even close.
Nice. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that you've put a date on this and I totally agree, Jason, that if you can commit to something like this for 3 or 6 months, I think by that process of committal, by going at it, you're just going to see huge benefits. And then you're going to look back at this episode, thank us both. Thank you particularly, because I'm only pulling out the information that's in your brain here. And I think, honestly, I think it's a no-brainer. But I think it's getting over that initial push of changing your mindset to being more open to adding value first versus, only adding value when you know there's something else on the table. Is there some way that we can get over that initial momentum and get that initial push going?
I think you have to realize everything in life is about taking a leap of faith. And we've all taken leaps of faith without the evidence before, and we've had success. The problem is, what most people do is they'll take a leap of faith and they'll say, if I don't sell this much in this quarter, it's failed, right? And the problem with that is when you're fixed on an outcome, and you'll seek and you shall find, I always tell the people. And the problem is that when I was writing my book, I talked to a couple hundred very successful entrepreneurs. And I asked them, out of every 10 new things that you do, how many of those are you successful at? And their answers were between 5 to 7 things. Every new things they do, they fail the first time, and they end up having to pivot or just stop doing it completely. So very successful people are failing at a very high rate. And the thing about it is that you have to be willing to take the leap of faith for the experience and what you learn from it, not the outcomes. Because otherwise, you're going to sell yourself really short in what's going on. And so that's the problem with people, that they want the evidence first, but that's not how life comes, right? And anyone knows, if you've asked someone to marry you or some big event, like, that's a leap of faith. Now, in the back of your mind, you may think, oh, well, they've said this, but you don't know that. They actually have to do it, right? So you've done this before successfully. We all have. It's just when it comes to a context where we don't feel as confident, right? Because we don't have a lot of confidence, right? If you're a salesperson, you don't feel like I have that much confidence because you don't have the confidence. You're not the number one salesperson, or you haven't done it for 5 or 10 years successfully, or it's a new industry or new something else. Then your confidence really wanes, and you've got to think, I've got to keep taking these leaps of faith, and they will work out for me. And I don't know anyone that's doing this stuff that's not successful. That's the thing. I mean, if I could point to anyone who's done it and not been successful, that would be one thing. But I think if people think out there to themselves, who's not taking consistent leaps of faith that's not successful that they know, right? Now, if you've taken 1 or 2 and have not been successful, then what they're doing, they were fixated on getting something. And when you're fixated and attached to outcomes in your life, you will never be successful, because they will never be enough for you.
I love this. I love reframing it. It makes total sense to me. Hopefully this adds value to the audience as well. I was laughing in my head as you said it, because if you said that to a sales manager, they would get, and it makes sense and it works. Clearly it works, because you can look at the high performing people in the world that are doing this constantly, and you can model their behavior, and you're more likely to see success when you're modeling the behavior of someone who's doing well. But if you said to a sales manager, I'm not bothered about my sales target this year, I'm just going to give it, I'm not bothered about the outcomes, they'd probably strangle you at that point.
Yeah, they would. But reality is that then you'll probably be way more successful, because you won't be stressing and obsessing about it and going into a client and trying to force a sell. And what you'll do is you'll actually line up your products and services best with those people, and they will value, and then they'll buy more, even if they don't need it, because they know that you're going to advise them in doing this. I had a friend of mine who told me that, in his 20s, he was like one of the biggest commercial real estate people in the world. And he was in his mid-20s, which is unheard of. For commercial real estate, it's mainly late 30s and mainly 40s in doing this. And the reason is he went into every deal and told up front everything wrong with the building when he was selling it to someone else. So he's giving them every reason to say no. And therefore, when they looked at it and they found all the things that were wrong, they trusted him and asked him questions and actually leaned on him more than actually their agent, and ended up doing the deals a lot faster because they knew all the holes in it. Well, that's contrary to what anything else that people would tell you and how to operate, right? Well, it's the same way. When you think about the best interest of other people first, they trust you, and then they want to go all in because they don't have other people doing that, and you stand out, especially if they're buying a lot of stuff. I mean, everyone's buying many different things from many different people. So you've got to find a way to stand out from other people so you get prioritization in that person's mind and urgency for them to act.
Perfect way to wrap that up. I really appreciate that, Jason. And that context is the perfect way to describe it as well. Of Sales Nation listening to this, you can differentiate yourself by putting other people first, which is what sales should have been the whole way, and clearly it hasn't been. And with that, Jason, I've got a couple of questions that I ask everyone that comes on the show. First one, mate, what is one book or resource other than your own that you'd recommend to the Salesman podcast audience?
So a book that I absolutely love is a book by Brene Brown called Rising Strong. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I'm a big fan of that. The other one, Jonathan Fields just came out with a book called How to Live a Good Life, and it's an excellent book, right? He talks about different buckets in your life and how to fill them up. So I think both of those, and I think the book, for salespeople specifically, Giftology by John Ruhlin would be something that would be really helpful to understand the concept of giving gifts and the purpose behind it and why they actually work so well. And to hear some of his stories and how he built his whole business on doing these things and doing some crazy things that didn't cost him really much, but created his entire business. So
good stuff. Well, I'll link to them in the show notes over at salesman.red for this episode. Next one, who is the world's greatest salesperson?
Wow. It's funny, I think that probably one of the best people out there selling things is Richard Branson. And I think one of the reasons why is because he links everything into giving, right? He does so many things by that ultimately, if I were sitting there with you, I bet on Necker Island when he's doing all these things for charity, that's how he gets all these people in to do all the rest of the deals. Because they're not talking business, they're talking everything but business. And so that's why people want to do business with him, because he's willing to do that. So I find when you have people that are giving on the highest level, everyone wants to do business with them, because you don't need to have these long drawn out no one's selling to each other. People know the situation, they'll get a few of the details, and they'll sign in the dotted line. And that's what you'll find, but you have to be in this other mode and you have to commit to it for a period of time in order to get there.
For sure. I like Richard Branson. I don't know if you've read his autobiography or biography, the one he wrote himself. I don't know which way around they are. But when he first started off, and he talks about it in the book, he is such a good salesperson, from just literally having to nail the phones every day to get advertising in the student newspaper that he started with. And it's really easy to visualize as you read the book of him stood there in the cold. No mobile phones then, of course. He doesn't have a landline, and he's putting in his coins into the payphone, and I think he borrows change off his mum to be able to make the calls. So he's making that initial investment in himself, and I found it really fascinating for his journey to go from that, clearly becoming a great salesperson because he has to clearly where he is now, owning islands and all the other stuff that he does.
Yep, it's fascinating.
Good man. Jason, I've got one final question for you, mate. Something I ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I would say invest in people and your relationships and yourself in building out soft skills, because that is going to dictate your life. It's the people and how you treat them and how you interact with them is going to make everything in life so much better and so much sweeter.
Definitely. Love it. Perfect way to sum up the show. With that, Jason, tell us a little bit about the book and then where we can find out more about you as well.
So you can find my book, Social Wealth. It's really a how-to guide on building extraordinary personal and professional relationships. I spent a lot of time in the book making it, really short, meaning 125 pages and actionable, so people can take it, flip through it, use it, refer back to it. And I spent 2 years writing it and interviewing, really, really well-known people, and then some very successful entrepreneurs, and just putting this together and interviewed probably 1,000 people. So it's something I think will be useful for people and salespeople in doing exactly what they're doing now. And then you can go to my website, and it's my Jason, and it's treu.com, and there's white papers. There's a lot of, podcasts and videos and other resources on there for people. And, there's coaching services on there as well, because I work with people and how to help them, create better businesses, meet people, and figure a lot of these things out today that we're talking about, and teach them the skill sets that separates them from other people, because human behavior is my love and passion as well as my business. So.
Good stuff. We'll link to all that in the show notes over at salesman.red. And with that, Jason, again, I want to thank you for your insights. I want to thank you I threw a couple of curveballs at you there, and you came back and you reframed everything very far better than what I could have. And so it was almost like I was trying to get my ideas out through you, because I agree with everything that you're saying here. I agree that salespeople giving value up front, it might not lead to initially more deals over the weeks. But I think if you're committed to sales, if you're committed especially to a specific industry, it's the people who are 5-6 years in, who have a pretty good time in sales. They've got pretty good relationships. They've got the commission is almost kind of wrapped up at the beginning of the year, because the customers aren't going to go with anyone else other than them. At that point, sales becomes a really interesting job, and they can really thrive in that position. So I agree with everything you're saying, mate. And I appreciate your time, and I thank you for coming on the Salesman podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
And there we have it. Jason, thank you for coming on the show, mate. I appreciate your insights and your time. The idea of social wealth is super fascinating to me, and hopefully I'm building it moving forward with this very podcast itself. I want to thank you guys, Sales Nation, for tuning in. As always, if you enjoyed this one and you're not subscribed, hit that huge red subscribe button below this so you don't miss any of the future content that we're putting out. And with that all said, I'll speak with you on tomorrow's episode.